thank you guys for sitting down today. We're going to talk about music and church and liturgy and sort of how those things intersect. And as we dive into it, sort of as we look through the Bible, we see music all over the place, instruments, singing. What kind of role does music play in the Christian faith? Anyone want to jump in and do the
I'll start off real quick. So, one, I would say it's very, very, very important for the Christian faith. One, because God obviously gives us the book of Psalms, which is all music. I think, obviously in 2019, especially for me growing up, the Psalms was only thought as a book to be read, not a book to be sung. And obviously we lost that in this, obviously, the century and whatnot. But for me, I think it's very important because for the role in the church, it's emotional. It allows me to be human. When I open up the book of Psalms, it's not necessarily like this clear-cut, perfect Christian that's talking. He's giving these like real emotions, and he's asking questions that aren't necessarily theologically correct. Like, do you hear me, God? And so for me personally, and also for the church, I think it gives this general statement like, hey, you are human and everything is okay. So.
Yeah. That's exactly the way I view the Psalms. It's one of the reasons I love the Psalms is that because I think of them as like the raw poetry. I mean, there's nothing that's just like where they're trying to say everything just theologically correct, or as I like to think of it, they're not trying to make sure they're conforming themselves to divine etiquette. I mean, they are just out there. I'm mad. Where the hell are you, God? I'm suffering, and where are you? And so, I wish that we could recapture some of that in some of our music today. I mean, if the Psalms are a model for what Christian songs should be like, and I wish we could recapture some of that lament and that raw honesty that is at the same time not just talking about God, but talking directly to God. Yeah, it's one of the reasons I appreciate the Psalms.
Chad, I love the course that you did where it's Jesus in the Old Testament and the very last classes on like the Psalms and Jesus in the Psalms. And for me, that was really powerful to go through as a worship leader at a church, to go back and rethink about where does Jesus fit in and all of this. And then as a worship leader, I feel like our goal is to help people connect to the gospel, right? To Jesus and what he's done for us and through his life. And for me, just that whole idea of the Psalms has Jesus all in it. And that to me was very like helpful, even after doing worship for a while now and being in a church like all of us are. Just the idea that Jesus is right in the middle of all of that. And that to me was so cool. I don't know if that like connects with where you guys are, or what's going on with you as leaders in the church, but helping people to reconnect with that.
Yeah, I think that practically the act of singing, whether it's the Psalms or choruses or any Christian doctrine hymns, these sorts of things, practically there's something very uniting that happens in the act of singing. There's a unification of our sort of humanity, our suffering, our joys, and just a beauty in the art of music and singing in the church. I think music itself, even if you just set the words aside, has a certain kind of power in it artistically to communicate truth and beauty and do a really good and deep work inside the human being.
Yeah. That's awesome. I agree.
Awesome.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think, to your point too about the Psalms, and as we see them kind of lamenting and rejoicing equally, I think, thankfully, we're seeing a little bit of a resurgence of some of those tones, ideas in worship, and this kind of flowing into the next question here. And when we think about worship biblically, what kind of implications does that have musically? Does it stylistically impact anything? Contemporary music for a long time kind of gets this, and I think even today still gets sort of a bad rap, contemporary music, right? It's just really emotive, shallow, doesn't mean much. And I think there are great examples of that, right? But one could push back that there are also examples of, you talk about music having there's a sense of communicating beauty and truth and emotion, right? One could push back and say, well, have you been to my church? Have you heard the organ there? Have you heard, and that's not, saying that every church is like that, but we can all equally veer in a little bit of a non-theologically deep or connecting with the heart, I guess.
Yeah.
So what are your guys' thoughts on that? Does the Bible say anything about that? Maybe this is probably a conversation you've had a million times in various ways, but yeah. Any thoughts on that? Does it dictate style? Does it dictate?
Man, I don't know. And please, jump in if you guys think I'm incorrect. But I don't know if there is a specific command that dictates style. When I look at Revelation 7, it says that every tongue, tribe, and nation will be rejoicing with the Lord. I have to automatically assume that the way that they were worshiping the Lord prior to obviously new heaven, new earth is going to look different. There's going to be different styles, different genres. I know for me, it's going to look totally different than probably what Chad was going through or what Chad was experiencing prior to us meeting. But at the same time, my rule of thumb is I'm more concerned with the content rather than necessarily, the musicality. If I can't just read the lyrics and feel the same thing that I'm feeling when the drums start coming in or the guitar or the bass, there's obviously something, I'm missing something here. So stylistically, I would say there is liberty there. And that's even with, and it's weird, even with me saying that there's liberty, I would still say that there's some parameters, but I don't know exactly what that looks like. So.
I'll respond to that. So I, through, I guess, 20 something years of leading church music, I've sort of landed on this. The words are really, really important, but I found myself kind of sacrificing the music or viewing the music kind of as a neutral vehicle for words. And then I started having kids and I realized that they don't understand the words. So how are they engaging with God? And then I was thinking about, people with intellectual disabilities. If they don't understand the words, how are they engaging God? And so it made me think that maybe there's more to the music itself, the act of singing, the non-verbal, the non-cognitive practice that is actually forming us spiritually. I'll just say that. So I love words. Words are my favorite, but and I love theology too. But it's this little thing. Are we sometimes falling into that view of music as kind of a neutral vehicle for words?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a sense in which when you have, especially a very well-known text that's wedded to a well-known tune, there really is a marriage there in which the two become one flesh. So that when you hear the words, if you just hear the words, you're hearing the music. And if you hear the music, you're also hearing the words, so that these two are just inseparable. And that goes to the power of the music. If you can just hear the music, but when you do, you know the words, or you hear the words, you hear the music. So I like to think of it this way, just as regard to what kind of music you choose and whatever words are joined to those, that whatever you do, make sure that you're doing it in such a way that what is being heard and then heard again and then heard again is going to stay with you. So I like to say that, when you're old and maybe you've forgotten almost everything, sing now the things that you want to be able to still sing then. As people experience all the time with elderly or people with dementia, they can still sing things they learned when they were 5 years old. Yeah. So whatever the music is, make sure that when it's wedded to the words, it's going to have that kind of deep, abiding impression on you.
So in our discussion about music, I mean, we're all kind of coming from different places. Whether you spend a lot of time as a lyricist and a poet, you're doing battle rap, and we're more living in the church realm, but I think also probably experienced outside of that too. So what if any, when it comes to Christian sacred music, secular music, what kind of distinction is there? Is there a different function between what we would do with music in a worship context versus like a secular context? I mean, any thoughts on that?
Looking at me. Okay, so distinctions. I don't know if you can draw those kind of lines when it comes to music, but the beauty of like the church, the beauty of the gospel is where the distinctions come in, I feel like, to a degree, right? And so for me, I can worship God when I'm not in a sanctuary with my regular kind of worshiping community on Sunday morning by going to like an amazing concert at the American Airlines Arena where I live in Dallas, and just hearing some of the most incredible musicians play. That to me brings me close to God in a way that is really worshipful. But I do think like in the context of gathering God's people together, maybe on a Sunday or whenever people gather to sing hymns and songs and spiritual songs to him, that's where I think there's so much power and life, right? And so there is a distinction in some ways when you're gathering people for that singular purpose, right?
Yeah. To your point, too, about talking about singing these songs and associating a tune, I can remember a time in Tokyo when I was getting off the train there, and you can hear Amazing Grace playing. And it's basically was like a cart vendor selling stuff, and Amazing Grace is just piped in. And
Wow.
So the meaning is totally different. So, what point does sacred music become secular music, or, and I think your point about what's the purpose on Sunday morning? We're meeting for a specific purpose in our role as worship leaders, as song leaders, is distinct from.
I think it has to do with the story, right? That we're a part of as Christians. The story that we're telling when we sing songs. I mean, singing is in every culture a way of telling stories. I think. And one of my mentors, Robert Weber, would say that worship is proclaiming, singing, and enacting the story of God. It's kind of how he defined worship. It was this, and I think that speaks into the very particular use of music and kind of music that we use when we're leading people in the act of worship. Is it the story of God? Are we proclaiming the story of God in our songs? I think that's what makes church music or sacred music distinctly sacred.
Yeah, and I agree too. I think for me, especially with somebody who does rap, we get a bad rap because of, historically where hip hop is used. But for me, I kind of look at it the same way. I think the story being told defines if it's sacred. And so there's 4 categories that I kind of use music in. Obviously, they're sacred. And I think what you guys did this morning, that was sacred. I'm listening to that and I'm like, man, this is telling me something about God and what he has done. After that, I think there's moral music. And I would kind of put somebody like Adele in there, or there's a hip hop artist by the name of J. Cole where he raps about, being faithful to his wife, but he's not necessarily vertically giving praise to the Lord. I think that there's music that's amoral. It's just nothing. So like the happy birthday song, that's just there. And then obviously you have immoral music where there's like, and especially in the hip hop culture, there's like specific songs that are talking about things that contradict the character of God. And so that's where I think like the story being told, and because all 4 of them are telling a story. And I like for me, I think in the corporate setting, like when I'm worshiping, is this something that I can sing with my brothers who agree with everything that's being said there? And can I do this unto the glory of God? And so I think that's my rubric when I'm looking at music and what could, what should be sung in the corporate gathering.
It's good.
Yeah, it is.
I speak to one little thing in there, just having to do with I feel like we've adequately defined what makes music sacred, but I think it was Schmemann, Alexander Schmemann, his book For the Life of the World, where he kind of talks about how we can fool ourselves into thinking that there's nothing, or that secular. He says that there's no time that we're not worshiping. So in a sense, if secular means the absence of worship or not worshiping, what he's saying is that there's nothing secular because our hearts are always being pulled towards something.
Yeah.
And if worship is this act of directing our desires if Christian worship is directing our desires towards the Lord, then our desires are being directed towards other things. In a sense, we're worshiping all the time.
Yeah, I think we fall into, I think, a trap of too easily categorizing things, sacred, secular, and I think we just got some really solid definitions or ideas that sort of point us to a way of thinking that's different than in and out or good and bad or okay for church, not okay for church, and it's a bigger discussion than simply sacred, secular. Along those lines, as we kind of continue in that path of worship, when we talk about liturgy, and whether from a biblical perspective or maybe a practical perspective, what is the relationship that exists between music and liturgy? You can go and see it all sorts of different ways, right? But what kind of relationship exists there? What do you guys see? Is that
Looking at me?
Are you guys all in liturgical churches?
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you a little biblical perspective.
Sure.
That we have evidence already in Chronicles that the temple choirs of the Levites were established, who would have been probably singing psalms in the context of the liturgy of sacrifice that was taking place. So we know already from the deep roots of the Old Testament that these two have always been intertwined. And of course, we have evidence, for example, from Psalm 150, this long list of instruments that would have been used while the Levitical choirs were singing. So that's this joining together of music and liturgy has deep biblical roots and no doubt continued through the life of the church. It's going to look different, of course, in various congregations. But the liturgy was never meant to be just kind of a verbal recitation of words, but it was always meant to be beautified by the music that was joined to it.
To answer your question, when you asked, do I go to a liturgical church? I almost wanted to say no. And then I was like, I don't know if there's like a non-liturgical, right? Like there's no such, at least I know for me and my culture, like liturgy is not sexy. And so it's not something that like, jump at, but there's a format, there's a pattern that we follow every Sunday. And that is liturgy in a sense. Now, obviously you and I would say, hey, there's just healthier options out there when we talk about liturgical services. But I think like taking like what I'm doing and obviously the music touches a bunch of my sensibilities, and so I'm listening. But throughout the whole service, like the confessing of sin, obviously sacraments and stuff, like it involves the whole me, and so I look forward to it. And I think obviously the combination between liturgy and music, there's just no way that you could just divorce yourself from that as human beings. Like to not be liturgical would be to not have a church service. Be similar to somebody saying, hey, I don't believe in any creed. That's the creed, and so I think it's you automatically do it when you walk into a church service. I think it's important, and obviously I'm learning as I'm even just being here in this conference. What can I take and what can I implement into my church plant that doesn't necessarily see liturgy as important?
It's interesting too. I feel like right now in the cultural kind of context that we're in here in America, especially the desire, it's almost like the desire for the generations that are kind of millennial and younger coming back to a more kind of traditional style of liturgy and less of kind of the, whatever you want to call it, laser light show, arena worship, whatever type of experience, but more of to like an ancient, future, modern experience where there's some of those rhythms of some of the liturgy that has been around for a long time, right? And to me, that's encouraging because what it's showing me is that it's not about kind of the things that are shiny or that people are looking for, but it's more the content and the deeper longing to connect with something in worship that is, it's just not made up week to week, but there are roots, there's like deepness to it. And so to me, that's encouraging because I hope that's where we do end up, is kind of a trend toward some of the more liturgical, I guess you could say. I don't know if that's like even more, but does that make sense? Or are you experiencing that in some of your
I think there's a desire to not just be part of something that's brand new. For a while, everyone wanted to start something brand new. And there's this sort of idea that, wait, we're part of a bigger, longer, historic tradition that didn't start 5 years ago or 10 years ago or even 100 years ago, And even as we look at the songs that we sing on a Sunday morning, saying, well, are we going to just sing the songs that were from the last decade, or is it important to include, a song from 1530 or whatever, And so, what would you guys say about that? Are you seeing that as well? Is it important to not just write or sing what your community is producing? Or how does the historic canon of music influence what you sing?
I think it's a lot like our conference on the creed, right? I mean, we're drawing on something that is centuries old, but we're also still expressing these truths in new ways. And I think that he's like that. I think we'd be foolish to just draw upon the last 10 years of resources or 100 years because we have not just 2,000 years, we have the Psalms. So we have this wealth of material that we can draw on, while at the same time adding contemporary lyrics and music to that. So we just continue to build upon the treasure that we've received.
I like to say that there's an old song yet to be written. There's a familiarity in a tune that seems to be rooted deeply in the faith and in the culture, like deep in the ground of a culture, right? That when it's sung, even if it's a brand new song, there's a sense in which the human soul kind of immediately latches onto it, engages with it, that sort of thing. So, I kind of like the ancient future or the,
Well, thank you guys for sitting down and discussing this stuff, and hopefully it'll be helpful for those watching, and hopefully we can just continue the conversation. So, thank you.